Let's go in focus to find out with Steve Forbes, Bill Baldwin, John Tamny, Bruce Japsen is with us, and Patrice Lee Onwuka. So, Steve, is Ambassador Haley doing the right thing?
Yes, David, it's a good small step in the right direction. The UN could operate on less half the money it spends today. One example is a special agency they have for Palestinian refugees. It's been going on for 70 years. After World War II, with tens of millions of refugees, they're resettled in a few years. After India and Pakistan broke up, resettled in a few years. And what these camps do, David, is provide sources of terrorism, preaching violence against Israel, and teaching young Palestinians they're going to go back to Israel. That thing should be shut down.
And, Bruce, it's not like we're being stingy in what we give the UN. We give the United Nations 22% of just their GA budget, the General Assembly budget. 22%. The number two country is only 9%. That's Japan. And then it goes down from there. So shouldn't we get a little more bang for our buck?
Well, listen, the way I look at this, I sort of, to get a full picture, I sort of view it as sort of like Donald Trump's tax return. I'd like to see the whole budget before I make a judgment. But when you consider that we're spending about $1 billion or so on the United Nations, and we're spending $800 billion, we're going to have a huge budget for defense. This is a drop in the bucket. And when you talk about the Trump riling up our allies and so forth, we might end up having to spend more. It's not that much to spend.
Well, John, the fact is that we'd all like to look at the UN budget, and part of the problem is it's such a corrupt agency. There's so many different channels in which the money can go. Nobody has a clear idea of how much. Claudia Rosette, who's the smartest person in the UN I know, she says the total UN funding is $49 billion. And look at where some of these the money goes to some of these scandals. We can put those up there. We had the oil for food scandal, the sex abuse scandal involving the UN. Peacekeepers were involved in sexual abuse of some of the people they were supposed to protect. Cronyism at UNESCO. Cash for Kim in North Korea. I mean, scandal after scandal after scandal.
Well, I think what's most scandalous about all this is the basic truth that the UN is most famous for being an organization that routinely trash talks the United States. And so why on earth would the U.S. be the number one funder of that which routinely brings it down?
Let's talk about specifically, Bill, what Nikki Haley said about what she's trying to do. She said the inefficiency and overspending of the UN are well known. We will no longer let the generosity of the American people be taken advantage of or remain unchecked. Isn't that a fair comment?
Well, I don't totally agree with the ambassador. I don't think the UN should be all chopped to pieces. It's true that there's a lot of buffoonery there. There's a huge amount of money wasted. But still, this is our last best chance to sit down with enemies before resorting to warfare.
But, Patrice, even some Democrats are for what our new ambassador to the UN is doing. And one of those is Alan Dershowitz. Here's what he had to say on Fox News earlier in the week. Play the tape.
As far as what Nikki Haley has done, it's, I think, terrific. It's about time we sent a message to the UN, which has become a place of hate when it comes to the United States and Israel.
So it's not only Republicans, some Democrats are for this as well, Patrice.
I think he was absolutely right. I mean, we see nations that come together, particularly Islamic nations, who don't contribute their fair share, by the way, but they use this opportunity as an international platform to denigrate Israel and to come against the United States. You know, I am really pleased that you brought up some of those other scandals at the UN. When we consider in 2010, UN peacekeepers dumped sewage in Haiti and led to the death of thousands of Haitians. So we need better accountability, fiscal responsibility out of the United Nations, and to know that our tax dollars are really well spent.
And, Steve, we mentioned Democrats. There was a famous Democrat who's no longer with us named Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He was senator of New York, but before that, he was the UN ambassador for the U.S. And here's the cover of Time magazine, giving them hell at the UN. That's a Democrat. It started back then.
Yes, because the UN had gone totally off the rails then, being an anti-Israel platform, calling it an imperialist state and condemning it, just as they did on the Jerusalem move. But these two moves, David, moving the capital to Jerusalem and telling the UN there's a new day at hand, is the only way you're going to get peace in the Middle East and the rest of the world when they know we're serious. We're not going to play any more pretend games and finance corruption because we think it breeds world peace. Just breeds cynicism and waste.
And, Bruce, we've tried talking it out. Every time the UN says they're going to clean up their act, they never do. They had an audit, a special audit committee that lasted 2 2 years, from 2006 to 2008, it was disbanded because there was just too much corruption. Something has to be done at the UN, no?
Listen, I think that certainly there are ways to spend smarter and spend better, but if we're truly going to be promoting peace around the world, or if we're going to have a body, I agree with Bill in the sense that the United Nations is probably the one place anymore where we can meet with our allies and others and discuss matters to promote peace around the world.
But, John, it is a nest of corruption. I mean, it's bad. A regular bureaucracy is bad enough, but an international bureaucracy means that nobody is in charge, that you can't affix accountability to anybody, and that's why they get away with stuff there.
Well, and I think almost forget about the corruption, and let's talk about the basic truth that countries that trade together do not war with one another. And that's where I'm sympathetic to Bruce. Cut defense spending too. But you don't need a UN if borders to goods and services are free, because people around the world have a rooting interest in world peace. You don't need a UN, you need free trade.
Bill?
Patrice is totally right. We need to see a lot more accountability. But here's something else to think about. In the 21st century, we're going to need a lot more, not less, a lot more cooperation to prevent war and to prevent viral epidemics.
But cooperation is one thing. When you give money, so much money as we do to the United Nations, as the U.S. does to the United Nations, and then they essentially spit on you after you've given that money. I mean, are we supposed to just sit there and take it, Patrice?
No, I don't think we should. I mean, this is more than just what's spent on vaccinations and peacekeeping. We're talking about lavish lifestyles of people who live in New York, who work for the UN but live in New York and take advantage of it. So, you know, I do see the points of all the different panelists here who say, you know, we want trade, we want peacekeeping, we want countries to work together. But this forum hasn't really proven to be, you know, the effective forum for making that happen.
Yeah.
You've got dictators who are not even allowing their people to eat in many countries, coming to the United Nations telling us what we should be doing, you know, as a country and as a nation, which is the most generous nation, by the way.
Absolutely. Patrice, thank you very much.